Hey guys, welcome to the first ever episode of The Blue-Headed Stepchild. I'm your host, Sam Lee. On this show, we're going to be covering all the local issues here in Austin. So anything from local politics, housing, affordability, transportation, you name it, all the most pressing issues facing Austinites today. And so, for example, on the first show, I interviewed Greg Anderson. Greg is the director for community affairs for our local Austin Habitat for Humanity, and probably the most knowledgeable person in the entire city when it comes to housing policy, land code, development, all that stuff. The name, The Blue-Headed Stepchild, is a play on the idea that Austin is a liberal stronghold in a conservative sea of red. And so I appreciate y'all's support. Check out the show. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to The Blue-Headed Stepchild. I'm your host, Sam Lee, and today's guest is Greg Anderson. How's it going, Greg?
Hey, everybody.
Greg is the current director of community affairs for Austin Habitat for Humanity. He's also a lecturer at the University of Austin for urban affairs. He was formerly the policy director for Mayor Pro Tem Sheryl Cole.
One and the same.
And he's at the forefront of all things housing related here in Austin. And in his own words, loves responsible land use that welcomes all Austinites.
May as well.
Greg, do you dream about housing?
Ooh, some of those dreams are good and some of those dreams are bad. Yeah.
Well, thank you for being here. And as I mentioned before, kind of like the bread and butter, the meat and potatoes of what I want to get into is the home initiative, which is very much kind of at the forefront of the news cycle here in Austin and a big development. But before we do that, I wanted to kind of backtrack a little bit into some of the historical precedent and kind of how we got here.
You bet.
So where is the good starting spot? I mean, you can go back forever, right? I know, 1929, 21 was one of the land code rights, but where is kind of a good starting spot?
What if we went just maybe a little bit further back?
Okay.
6,000 years.
Okay.
The birth of cities. in cities, really, I mean, the land value and the needs of the city and the needs of the community, that's what dictated what got built and where, and density and use. And then came along zoning in 1915 in the United States.
Okay.
And you can look back to why zoning came along and who zoning was targeting. And folks weren't shy about who they were targeting back in the day. And so zoning was created. Zoning went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court eventually ruled with the Chief Justice saying something along the lines of apartments are parasites to our cities.
Okay.
So here we are, 100 years later, and clearly in a gigantic affordability crisis. And so much of that has just been the result of us making housing illegal to build in far too many places.
And so you said they're not shy about who they're zoning against. Say it bluntly here. Like, what are we talking about?
Sure. So in 1916, when they first brought in zoning, for Berkeley, California, it was Chinese laundromats. And then for New York City, it was Eastern European Jews. And folks were, living their lives and creating businesses. And then other folks had issues with certain people in their communities. And those were the main folks, the first folks kind of spelled out in kind of old meeting minutes. Nolan Gray does a great job in Arbitrary Lines of kind of finding these old historical documents and being like, wow, here they are. But then, of course, there were racial deed restrictions where Austin's not unique, but roughly 50% of Austin was covered in two forms of racial deed restrictions. One, you can't live here if you're a person of color. The other, you can only live here with Caucasian blood, same darn thing, right? And then for the areas where we didn't have racial deed restrictions, you had the red lining and yellow lining, and just insurance companies were able to say, okay, this place is high risk. And so a hailstorm comes through, our homes are on other sides of this line right here, this arbitrary line. And for some reason, one of us is redlined, the other is not. The bank can say, well, we're just not going to lend to you. It's high risk. Or they can give you a usury rate and just charge you way too much.
Right.
So Yeah, it's had bad effects for decades.
Sure. Are there any, what's the argument for them, right? So, or for zoning, right? So, obviously it was used nefariously in its historical beginnings, but what's the basic high level argument for zoning?
We can talk about nuisances. So if you want to talk about, regulating nuisances. So do you want a smelting plant next to an elementary school? Probably not.
Right.
Do you want a gas station right next to your home? Probably not.
Right.
And so there's things that we could look at that make sense in allowing a city to be a city. But to say that this type of housing is not compatible with this type of housing, typically the triggering property that says you're not compatible to be near me is very expensive property. It's like a large lot, single family zoned home, and it's only going to be affordable to 5 to 10% of the population. And what it does is it makes the next door development that was going to be affordable to a much broader range of income earners, it makes that entire product less affordable because they can build fewer homes and they're restricted in what they're allowed to build. And there's a reason why Travis County is losing population and the city of Austin is only gaining 9% of the new housing growth of the entire metro, per our demographer recently sharing that with city council. And that's just devastating because what that means is we're sprawling.
Right. And that's interesting because that kind of goes against the narrative that Austin is booming, right? So and I think we may be like referring to the same article. I think there was an Austin Business Journal article that took those, the demographer's finding and kind of summarized them. And the Austin metro was found to be the second fastest growing metro in the country for 12 years in a row. It was the fastest growing. But like you just said, in Travis County and in Central, there was net negative. Is that right?
Just came out in Travis County,
right?
2,500 folks,
which would I think blow a lot of people's mind, and a lot of that reason is because of affordability, right? In the core, and all that growth is turning into sprawl, right? And sprawl meaning the suburbs are booming and geographically recovering a larger area, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And of course, you asked how we get here. Let's come back to more recent times. So Austin updated its land development code in 1984, had one speaker is what I'm told. One speaker came out to speak, hey, blah, blah, blah. And of course, it was more of a downzoning. So imagine being able to build a lot of housing, capacity of housing. So if you're built, the homes that have been built in your community, and then you have your capacity for building this many more homes.
Okay.
And as that capacity shrinks, the land value goes up because you can build in fewer places. And so in 1984, big downzoning, a lot of places where you could used to be able to build triplexes and fourplexes, that was all brought down to you can now build 1 or 2 homes. Even a little bit before that, in 1930s, when we finally did away with racial covenants at the federal level, Austin that same year upped its minimum lot size from 3,000 square feet to 5,750 square feet. So what I like to share is like if you're wearing a gold ring, imagine if you were required to suddenly have 80% more gold in that ring. Is that going to lower the cost, make the cost the same, or increase the cost?
Right.
It's going to increase the cost.
Sure.
And the folks who did that and increased the minimum lot size, they knew what they were doing. They had the same kind of nefarious ideas that these racial deed restrictions had. And now City Council, many years later, is finally looking to address a lot of these things. In 2012, we adopted as a city, Imagine Austin, which is your comprehensive vision of a city. It's what do we care about? Education, the environment, transportation, access to fresh foods, and all those important things. And housing was a big part of that. And we said we want to adopt a new land development code to promote a compact and connected city. And so we spent 8 years as a community working on that. Lots of resources, had outside expertise come in. We passed it on first reading. We passed it on second reading. Council was 10 days away from passing it on third and final reading, and a small group of homeowners sued and unfortunately overturned that in the courts. So then council said, okay, let's try again, because obviously housing is still an issue. It's an even bigger issue. We know what housing has done since 2020. It's only gotten way more expensive. And so then they started to work on different zoning categories like vertical mixed use 2, relaxing compatibility, which is this horrible rule that costs us a tremendous amount of housing, and legalizing residential and commercial. And those things, as well as affordability unlocked, were all challenged in the courts again. And a different judge just completely overturned the democratic process, throwing all those things out. Thankfully, affordability unlocked didn't get thrown out, but all those other items did. And so now council is just continuing to work on things. Home is one of those items of a list of items they're all working on, but we need a lot more progress when it comes to legalizing housing in Austin, Texas.
Right. And so my understanding is that, so for Code Next, the big rewrite, this is like a 1,000-page document, right? Like very comprehensive. And since that got shut down twice, now it's more of a piecemeal approach that council is taking. Is that the right way? I mean, how long is that going to take? Say, we haven't even got to home yet, but the home initiative is a piece of it, right? Is that 1 page? Is that 2 pages out of the 1,000? And if so, is this going to take us, another 500 years? Like, I know the piecemeal approach is perhaps more palatable and easier to get through not only council, the courts, but also through the public. But we're in a crisis, as you said, like a housing affordability crisis. And so is the piece-by-piece approach going to work?
First off, unfortunately, it ever got that name of Code Next, right? What we should have named the rewrite of our 1984 Land Development Code is just that, the rewrite of our 1984 Land Development Code. So when the city gave it the cute name of Code Next, it wasn't defended. So folks were out there just really throwing misinformation at it, like, this is going to do this. It's not only going to destroy the value of your home, but it's also going to make your taxes go through the roof. Now, notice those things are kind of contradictory, right?
Yeah.
And so it was really just, there was so much misinformation thrown out there, and the city tried a little bit to protect that, and actually this is what it does. But it wasn't as though, your podcast, for instance, if somebody said, well, it just makes coffee go cold fast, like what? You'd be like, what? That's ridiculous, right? So we defend, and if we have our company, if we have a brand, we defend it, and that was never defended. And so the name never should have happened, but the results and what it was supposed to do were desperately needed. And it was going to balance a whole lot of things. Our environmental standards are outdated as well. And so we were going to look to have better environmental controls for the developments as they occurred, to have better green roofs and energy efficiency and water efficiency and all those types of things. But they were going to be balanced with those entitlements to make it to where, by right, you as a landowner can now more easily redevelop your land in a way that achieves all these goals of Imagine Austin. And so the balanced approach was going to be the best approach. And now that we're doing it piecemeal, I mean, it's really exhausting. It's exhausting for community members. It's exhausting for staff, for city council, for anybody who volunteers on any board or commission. I mean, it's just that we're not even beginning to get through the number of zoning cases. If everything has to be a one-off, it's just so inefficient. And so if you want a code that achieves X, Y, and Z, then you just have to create that code that achieves those things.
Right.
Current code does not do that. And to make everyone jump through 1,000 hoops and pay millions of dollars for a discretionary zoning that they may or may not get years down the road, a lot of folks just don't bother. So hence they go 25, 30 miles out. And that's why we see so many rooftops going up.
Yeah.
Auto-centric development outside of Austin, where not building the homes that people need here. And so what happens is, let's say a lot of people like to blame the high income earner, right? So they come to town and they bought that home and they displaced somebody. What if we built the housing that everyone wants and didn't require displacement? I mean, the single best way to guarantee displacement in a growing community is to limit your new housing supply, which is something an outdated land development code does very well.
Right. Well, they are doing the piecemeal approach, and perhaps the first piece of that is the home initiative. So give us an overview of what that is, and some of the details about, where we stand in the process.
Sure. So Councilmember Leslie Poole, who's the longest serving, Mayor Pro Tem Leslie Poole, who's our longest serving current council member. She started in January of 2015. And, a lot of folks who have watched her political career, watched her come up, with a bit more of an emphasis on kind of keeping single family neighborhoods just the way they are. And she really believed in that. And what she started to notice was, it wasn't working. It just wasn't working. That the large lot, huge limitations on what can be built, the single 1 or 2 home that you could build on all, 70, 80% of Austin. And she started to realize, like, wait a minute, like the average person can no longer afford this. We really have to make housing easier to build. And so she worked, hand in hand with council, with staff to not make it to where everybody can now afford a single family home, but to really broaden the income range, to broaden the spectrum of who can afford these housing types, and to make it just a little bit easier to build those housing types. So AISD is losing roughly 1,000 students a year right now in Austin. And so that's our school district. Mm-hmm. And so Home Phase 1 did a couple of things. Namely, it allows 3 homes to be built on every legal single family lot. So 5,750 square feet, aka 1/5 of a football field. Had you been limited to a single home, now you can build up to 3. And there's a home phase 2 coming. What phase 2 looks to do is reduce the minimum lot sizes. So remember, those were jacked up back in the 30s, and now we're going to look to reduce those. Do you really need 5,750 square feet to have a single family home and to live happily? Maybe you do, and you'll still have that ability. No one's going to say you are required to build 3 homes here or have a smaller lot. Those are still going to be out there. But if you just want to live in Austin and you can't afford a multi-million-dollar home, which is what those are going for today, then we're going to allow for smaller lots, and we're going to allow for more efficient homes to be built on those lots. And so that's really exciting. Of course, that's one of couple things council's working on, but I think you're going to get to that here in a second.
Yes, for sure. And so, well, let me ask you about, for example, Houston, right? Mm-hmm. Which I think is a really good comparative study in that we have minimum lot size of 5,750. I think the proposed lot size for phase 2 of home was 1,250. Do I have that right? Or 1,250? No, am I off?
Staff is bringing forward a recommendation of 2,000 square feet.
2,000.
And that can potentially, that's the way I understand it. I'm seeing that final draft ordinance.
All right.
But that, of course, that could move. That could be a little bit smaller. It could be a little bit larger. We'll see what council eventually adopts.
Okay. And so, for example, Houston is known for very loose restrictions, easy zoning, and they have a much smaller minimum lot size. But when I think of Houston, I think of sprawl, right? And so how does that square in that in another case where they did reduce the lot size, you've got this probably the city with the biggest sprawl in the whole country, right? It could take you an hour and a half in rush hour to get across one city. And they have a land code that promotes density. Any thoughts on that?
Sprawl loves to chase interstates. So one of the best things that Austin will ever have going for it, if you look at Austin compared to any other major Texas city, I mean, interstates, TxDOT was allowed to encapsulate so many other major Texas cities, just completely ring them with interstates. And what's the experience like when you walk through an area with interstates? Especially when an interstate hits another interstate, which a lot of our downtowns, think about Dallas, Houston, San Antonio. As soon as that happens, I mean, you'll gobble up 100 acres just like that. Yeah. And you make it very autocentric. It's loud, it's noisy, it's smelly. People don't want to be there. A cafe is not going to survive very well, very long next to a giant interstate. And so Houston's interstates, they really drive a lot of that. Conversely, though, you can live right next to downtown in a brand new condo for half of what you can live in Austin, a new condo for. I've lost too many friends to go to Houston. They're just like, Greg, I love Austin. It's my home, but I just got, a home for $410,000. Like, give me that in Austin, and I'm in.
Yeah. So lot size is one piece of the puzzle, right? And you can't just kind of point to that and say, "Oh, Houston's sprawling," and like that's what's going on, right?
Right. When we spent decades just making it harder and harder and harder to build here, another fee, another regulation. If back in the day your lot could have had 100 homes, each time we passed something, it was now 70 homes, 60 homes, 50 homes. And we've priced these before. Like if you're already building a building, if you can throw on another floor, chances are your price per square foot in that entire building just went down because you're already mobilized. You're going one more floor. It's the same exact design. It's just more efficient. But we have all these little arbitrary rules to prevent those types of things. We've been stuck on this 60-foot height limit forever. And then there were all these things that ate into that, causing, different roof systems and setbacks and all these different things. So council is really trying to take all of these issues as seriously as they possibly can, working under very confusingly written state law. That's a big issue, right? So state law wasn't written about how to rewrite a land development code. And so they've tried their best to adhere to it. But as you can tell with these multiple lawsuits that have not gone our way, the folks who like fighting housing, they're having a great time with this. So council's trying, and they're going to keep trying, which is really great.
Yeah, for sure. And so for the home initiative, some of the pushback, right? I've seen that there are no quote unquote like big A affordability mechanisms built into it. I've seen that it can lead to some like land speculation and driving up prices, in that now developers are going to chase these lots even more, right? And I was surprised in just kind of researching this, like watching some news articles, that there was a more diverse coalition that opposed the home initiative versus, watching the more of like the Code Next opposition seem to come from, 78703 exclusively, right, sort of thing. So what's the counter argument to some of these pushbacks on the home initiative?
So use a little bit of jargon there. Let's talk about what you said about big A affordability, right?
Okay.
So there's big A affordability, which is income restricted. So let's say the city has a grant in, or the city has helped subsidize through affordable housing bond dollars to help make sure that a certain unit is going to be income restricted for 40 years if it's rental or 99 years if it's home ownership. That's called big A affordability. And of course, little A affordability is your naturally occurring affordability, which Austin used to be chock full of. I lived on South Lamar, an amazing home for $400 a month back in the late 90s. It was cheap and wonderful place. And there was a lot of naturally occurring affordability. I mean, maybe there was a dumpster nearby or a sodium light or whatever, but for whatever reason, we had a lot of naturally occurring affordability. As you limit your new housing supply in a growing city, that stuff goes away pretty fast. So yeah, there are definitely some folks saying, hey, there should be a density bonus requirement. So if we're allowing you more entitlements, you should have a requirement to have a income restricted unit on your lot. There's just not enough meat on the bone. Consultants have shared this with us. Any developer can share this with you, can walk through the numbers on this. I know this working at Habitat. Like, we have to subsidize housing units even beyond what the city participates in. So when the city comes in and helps invest in the unit, make that a possibility for a family here in Austin, that's still not enough to make it pencil. Mm-hmm. So we know that there's just this huge delta, and to only add one or two more homes per lot, and then to try and require one of those to be affordable, that is nothing but a poison pill. That just means you're going to get hardly any of those ever built. The only time it's going to happen is if it's quite literally grandma living there, and she wants to make sure her son and her grandson can live on that lot. And that's amazing. And those opportunities are definitely going to happen. We heard from some grandmothers who spoke during Home Phase 1. One who spoke very loud and clear. She's like, my grandson can't afford to live in Austin, but my backyard's huge. Wouldn't it be great if we pass this and I can build a home back there for him? So, those stories exist. But if we really want these smaller units to kind of be built all over Austin and allow a lot more families to live in Austin, we have to allow that type of home to be built, and we can't try and extract something from it. Housing is a community benefit unto itself. As far as the misinformation out there, though.
Oh, sorry, just to recap that, so that's really clear, because I think it's an important point. And so when we say affordable, right? Two meanings being the one where we say big A affordability, and that is income restricted housing. And by requiring one of those 3 units that's going to be on the lot to be income restricted, we say there's not enough meat on the bone, meaning that no developer would ever build them because it just wouldn't be profitable. And so half of the battle is getting a developer to build it also. And by taking the little a affordability approach is more just increasing supply, increasing density, and by more units being available, it'll put downwards pressure on market rates for prices to come down.
I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, we have to talk about that. So in Texas, we are not allowed to have inclusionary zoning. So you're going to build a building. You are required to have a certain number of homes be affordable when you're in Boston. This isn't Boston. This is Austin. So in Austin, we can use a density bonus program, which is an incentive. So you have your base entitlement, which is just simply what you're allowed to go out there and build today. But the city knows we need housing, knows we need bigger sidewalks and better sidewalks, knows we want street trees, maybe ground floor retail. And so a good example is vertical mixed use. A lot of those buildings you see in your commercial corridors, those are vertical mixed use buildings. And so what we say is you can build more of a building with less city restrictions that limited the number of units you can build in exchange for 10 or 12% under DB 90, which is something council just passed. If you build that bigger building, we just require 10 to 12% of those homes to be income restricted. Now notice that was 10 to 12% in that big building. When you have 1 out of 3, that is a 33% density bonus program. Outside of Affordability Unlocked, which was known to be a subsidized program, we don't expect any market rate developer to be utilizing Affordability Unlocked. We talked about that through its entire creation back in 2019. So through a density bonus program, you are incentivizing folks. So basically, if I'm going to give you, a water, well, let's dumb it down a little bit. If you're going to see $10 of value in this, you're going to be willing to spend $5 to $8 to get that $10 of value, right? Okay. But if I try and extract too much as a city, and I'm trying to extract $10 from you to get $10. Right. And then there's all these uncertainties of a longer time frame, or I'm trying to extract $20 for you to give me $10. Like those are just dead on arrival.
Right. Okay. Thank you for clarifying. And okay, so going back to opposition of home, and what's the counter argument to some of the fight being put up against it?
So there's something called exclusionary zoning. So zoning categories that are really by default only available to your very top income earners. And most of our single family zone neighborhoods are now 100% protected by exclusionary zoning. They're just unaffordable to the vast majority of Austinites. And there's always going to be folks who want to keep it just that way. And I hear this argument. I hear it often. It's like, well, when I bought my home in 1973, this is the way it was, and this is the way it should stay. And if Austin wasn't growing, or if Austin was shrinking, or if we just had plenty of housing and nobody was, living on the streets and there wasn't an affordability crisis, then we can talk about that, right? That could be a viable conversation of, well, maybe it shouldn't change. But we are a fast-growing city. There's a lot of folks who come here for opportunities. Our natural birth rate is making us grow. Like this is our natural growth rate just by births over deaths. So there's just folks who simply, I graduated, I live here, I'm born here, don't I get a place to stay? Right. And so we have to allow housing to be easier to build in a growing city. Otherwise, the problems are going to be a whole lot worse. And we're seeing those problems. We talk to a lot of folks every day. We all talk to these folks. A lot of folks talk to me, like, how do I get my daughter, my son to kind of open up and talk to me a little bit more? Or how do you get a stranger, a young person to talk to you a little bit more? Ask anybody on the streets that you meet. Ask your waiter, ask your Lyft driver, ask anybody. Ask them about housing. Just say, hey, what are your thoughts on housing here in Austin? They'll stop everything. They'll talk to you. Like they'll just open up and you're just like, wow.
Everybody has an opinion.
Oh, and it's strong. Yeah. And they realize something's wrong and something's really, really, really broken. And so, yes, there's going to be folks who simply, for the most part, homeowners, or just a real bummer about housing policy is I can spend 5 minutes giving you misinformation and telling you how terrible this policy is and it's going to ruin your lives and destroy your neighborhood. And I can have you more motivated to speak up against it than you would be if I gave you an hour of time sharing you about this great new policy and how it's going to be good for all these reasons about, supporting trans and supporting Austin's tax base and allowing for more folks to live in Austin on a budget that they can afford within their means. And it's just harder to get people to speak in favor for something. And it's just so easy to scare people with nonsense.
Yeah, it's just like general politics that people vote when they're scared, right? Like, and not when they're overjoyed about how well things are going, right?
Right.
So all right, so everything's been shut down in the courts, right? And I know it's this, what's to say, I don't know, maybe it has already. Has the home initiative been taken to court yet?
We heard from a few folks who got up in front of city council and have already threatened lawsuits. And I want to share with you, the same folks that brought these lawsuits, there's some folks who, when we had a bill at the legislature in 2021 to correct state policy and make it a little bit easier for cities to understand what they need to do to go about a process to rezone their cities, the same folks hired lobbyists to go kill that bill.
Right.
Because confusing the written bill where you're able to shut down a city and stop housing, It works for some. It's just not working for everyone.
Right. And so if they do follow through, what's to say that they're not going to be successful again? And what can be done to, I don't know, where does it start? Like, is it poor legislation that's being written on the local level, and the legislation isn't ironclad enough and it leaves it open to be challenged in courts? Is it a certain court district that these are being challenged in that's leaning a certain way that these are being shot down? Is it just state law that that allows this to keep happening? I don't know. It feels very, very futile, these attempts to keep changing a big problem and then just having all that evaporate. So I don't know. I asked a lot of things there.
There was a recent housing podcast on Axios, and they interviewed the housing director for the city of Dallas. And they asked the housing director, what is your biggest challenge to housing affordability in the city of Dallas? Without missing a beat, NIMBYism.
Mm-hmm.
NIMBYism isn't unique to Austin. So NIMBYism, another word, right? Not in my backyard.
Mm-hmm.
There's the opposite of that, which is YIMBY. Like, yes, we know we need housing. Let's build some housing. So
it's catching on recently. YIMBYism.
Yeah, especially as affordability gets harder and harder for more and more folks. So NIMBYism, it's not unique to us, and it's not going to go away. I mean, there's just always going to be that battle. So you mentioned earlier, I worked at City Hall for a while for Mayor Pro Tem Sheryl Cole. And yeah, I had many folks come into my office and just share like, no, we need to figure out ways to stop development. Now, it wasn't my job to tell them they're right or wrong. It was my job to listen.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was Sheryl's job, of course, as a policymaker, along with council, to then, vote on what needs to be voted on. But they voted to create a new land development code. They passed a lot of zoning that produced a certain amount of housing. The last time Austin had a balanced housing inventory was summer of 2011. So that's where neither the home buyer or the seller had the power. But there's going to be a continued fight to, just disparage developers. Like, developers. Developers are what you should actually be afraid of. Developers going to build housing where they're going to build housing.
Yeah.
And right now they're building endless thousands of rooftops forever out, which is hurting our air quality, our health, and so many other things. If we want to allow folks to be able to live on transit, to live where they can walk to work, to walk to their, local bakery and all those types of things, then we have to legalize that form of development here in Austin, which is what council's really working hard on trying to do right now. But the fact is, NIMBYism isn't going to stop. It's not going to go anywhere. But if you look at this city council is different than previous city councils. It's less worried about legalizing housing and then realizing, like, wait a minute, like when we recently said parking mandates, they don't make sense.
Mm-hmm.
So we got rid of them. Largest city in America to do so. Those types of things are really, saying that we care about the environment, we care about affordability, we care about sustainability, we care about all these different things, and then acting on those things. So It's pretty exciting seeing those things happen in the warmest year on record, 2023.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it is exciting that the new city council is at least trying, see what happens, but they're moving forward with some things. And just a quick anecdote on the parking minimums. I was in a house recently, and it's this, you walk upstairs and there's one bedroom at one end, another bedroom at the other end, and what looks like would be a hallway with a cutout of a bedroom. And I'm like, what's going on here? And my friend's like, well, they would have closed it in as a bedroom, but if you add that fourth bedroom, you had to add more parking. And so you've got this like massive cutout in the floor plan, just because to put a door on it sort of thing, you would have had to add more parking outside, and it just wasn't possible. And so
there are so many great examples about this. So we were building a community in Southeast Austin, and we used to have a 2 and a plus next to it and a 3 and a plus next to it. And someone one day was like, what's the plus mean? Like, oh, those are offices, wink.
Yeah.
And they were bedrooms.
Yeah.
And we put a closet in it, we'd actually have to call it a bedroom. So we called it plus. But had we put the closet in it, basically they wanted us to build parking for 6-year-olds.
Right.
And we didn't do that. Like, we knew what our families needed, and we couldn't afford to just throw another $10,000 to $15,000 per home to build unnecessary and unneeded parking. Another terrible example of this is the Integral Care Facility over on Oak Springs, where they built permanent supportive housing. So units for folks who were experiencing homelessness coming out of that, living in a place, and they required them to have one parking spot per home. And they knew 10%, on average, 10% of their clients had a motor vehicle.
Right.
And they were required to build millions of dollars worth of parking they didn't need. And so there were a couple of examples that now our Congressmember Greg Gassar, he really led on Affordability Unlocked. And he and our former council, they were just like, wait a minute, like, okay, we know we need to do this bigger, but for right now, for affordability, let's just say that, period, you get reduced setbacks, you get to build taller, you don't have a parking requirement, they just did all these things. And that was in 2019. And that was because they realized that so many, very valuable Austin taxpayer dollars produced in the Prop A of 2018, they were going to build things we didn't need, like those parking spaces. Right. So it's really cool to see council see a problem and then go to fix it.
Yeah.
But then to have the courts overturn on so many things so easily. Rough.
An emotional roller coaster. So you've said affordability unlocked a couple times. We've talked about the home initiative, and I think we got a good sense of what that is. And just to recap, that is going to be 3 units per lot. That's kind of the big one. There's a couple other changes about how many unrelated adults can live in the same unit. Some far restrictions on like duplexes and stuff that we didn't really touch on. But the next phase is going to be hopefully reducing the minimum lot size, and then also maybe like impervious coverage FAR limits. Is that coming in second phase?
TBD on what all comes, right? So staff's going to bring their recommendation. The city's going to be notified. Everyone's going to have a chance to speak up. But the big one is going to be the reduction of minimum lot sizes. Okay. And, imagine right now you have a home that for some reason they can only have one home on it right now, their regular lot, and they have a big old backyard. You might have, one thing Austin Habitat for Humanity does is we do critical home repair. And our typical client is a widow and most likely older, fixed income, and unable to fix the roof, right? Mm-hmm. And so when a roof goes, everything else pretty quickly goes there after it. And so by allowing folks who might have a lot of land who, the kids played on it back in the day, kids are grown, kids are out. And they have the ability now, if they so choose, to sell their backyard and have a family live back there and to suddenly have enough money to do whatever they want with their home. So to require so many people to have a big yard and then not allow them to do much with that yard, council's going to correct that here in a minute. It's going to be pretty great. Of course, the thing that does have to coincide with that is making subdivision laws a bit easier. So right now, the subdivision process is onerous, but council understands that and they see that in the permitting process also. A friend of mine from business school, her husband during COVID, 35, healthy, amazing guy, father of 2, passed away. His heart failed him. None of us saw it coming, devastated. She's like, oh, wow, like just beside herself, just trying to pick up life and just to move forward for her kids. Like she understands she has no choice. She has to be there for her kids. And so she's trying to add a bedroom to her home to have a live-in nanny. And she's not allowed.
Yeah.
She's not allowed because FAR limits and impervious cover limits and all these different limits. And then I talked to another family and they're expecting their next child and they need another bedroom because they're in a 3 and they already have one and they're trying to get another. And I'm just like, wait a minute, we're not allowed to add a bedroom. And so, with interest rates suddenly going from lowest they've been so long, so many folks are locked in at 2.5, 2.6, 2.7, 2.8 into the 3s, which compared to today is 6.7. It's just so low. You're going to see a lot of folks who used to just move to that other neighborhood or move to that 4-bedroom house. They're unable to. And so they're trying to build another bedroom. And my hope, one of my big hopes with home is that we figure out a way just to make it easier for folks to build that extra bedroom. Yeah.
Well, it sounds like they're on the right track and we'll pay attention to the next steps. And so affordability unlocked. Give me I thought this was being challenged in the courts too, but give me a quick high-level overview of what affordability unlocked is, and where we stand with that.
Sure. So the same small group of people who love going after stopping housing in Austin, they tried to sue Affordability Unlocked and they lost. They finally lost one. And so, Affordability Unlocked is producing thousands of incomes restricted units all across Austin for folks who desperately need housing. Well, we're talking permanent supportive housing units. So these are folks, experiencing homelessness today who get to now go have an actual door and a closet and access to a toilet and a kitchen, like from PSH to what Habitat builds to, I mean, if you think of anyone in Austin building affordable, income-restricted housing, they're most likely using Affordability Unlocked. And so it was really great to see that not get thrown out. The judge's reasoning wasn't the best. It was just like, oh, well, this has actually been around for over 3 years, so we're going to keep this. It wasn't like, oh, Austin, you actually did this correctly. Because the city keeps asking, like, okay, you're saying we did this wrong. How do we do it right? It'd be great to get some advice. Instead, it's like, good luck with your appeal. Like, there's no advice.
Yeah.
Right? And then, of course, you read the judgment, and it's like, wow, so the plaintiff pretty much got to write this, right? Because this is rubbish. This is so bad. It actually sets us back so much further. And so, yeah, it is great to finally have one thing be protected, and council did pass that in 2019, and we're seeing great results across the city, but we have to see that for market rate housing as well. So we're talking about income restricted units, 80% and below. If you right now, there have been families that I've talked to where a lot of the families we serve right now are single mothers. So a mom of one or two. It just happens to be where the MFIs are falling right now. But we've talked to people before in rental situations where they were offered raises that they said no to.
So they could still qualify for their income restricted housing.
They go from 56% MFI, median family income, and suddenly this raise is going to bring them to 72%.
Right.
They don't qualify for their apartment. And a lot of them are judicious about this. Like, they realize how important housing is, and so they just go sniff around. They're like, okay, if this is my new income, where can I get housing? It's like, oh, wow, nowhere. Right. And so, when your housing policies are that bad, and compatibility is another one. Compatibility is knocking down the height of things so much, where when they build, a lot of developments we see being built right now, the ground floor faces a wall or faces a fence because they have to actually build that subterranean just because of compatibility.
They go subterranean, so the height is still below the restriction, right?
Right. So we'd rather put a dozen people to look at a wall to save the supposed a little bit more view of the sky for the $1.4 million home across the street.
The sunlight and the warmth on their yard.
Which they would still have.
Yeah. The Bermuda grass does need a lot of sun.
We grow it. It's more protected in Austin than anything else.
Okay. Awesome. Well, let me ask you, is there any city in the world that you have visited that has got urban planning down right and that you think would be a good model? And I know it's very, a dreamy question and that sort of thing. And I think too, we forget that, it takes hundreds and thousands of years to plan and build these cities. And so when you're working retroactively, it's not necessarily as easy said as done. But just for funsies, where is a place that you've been that got it right?
That's a great question, just because, I love how former Mayor Steve Adler used to say this, so if there was a solution out there, if someone had figured it out, guess what we'd do? We'd steal it, and we would be unapologetic about it. Oh, wow, you got it right. We are 100% all over this.
Yeah.
So all the changes one of the arguments we hear down at City Hall is, that's not going to make it affordable for everyone. So therefore you shouldn't pass that. If that was the case, then that's like, you going in to see the doctor being like, I can't get you to 100%, so why don't you just get out of here, right? And it's not about 100%. It's about, let's make it better. Let's survive. Let's add hope to the equation. So,
or let's stop doing nothing that's not working.
Stop the bleeding. You just said we can't ruin cities in hundreds of years, but zoning's done a good job of making things pretty bad pretty quick. So, these incremental changes, every time we look at a policy, if it just makes it easier to build 2% more, 5% more, 10% more, like those are all good incremental changes. But you look at cities like Auckland, you look at cities like
Auckland, New Zealand.
Right. Just legalizing different forms of housing. You look at Bentonville, of all places, legal. Like, there's just all types of housing that are allowed to be built right next to each other. It doesn't ruin the world. It actually makes it a pretty interesting place to go walk around.
Bentonville, Northwest Arkansas.
Yes.
Yeah. Home of Walmart.
Right.
Yeah. Did Walmart have any input into the urban planning and the different types of housing?
And there's just all these places that are just legalizing housing. So go up near the University of Arkansas.
Okay.
And then Minnesota, cities up there, the Twin Cities. St. Paul, a little bit less so, but, just legalizing housing types. So they just went ahead and said, like Minneapolis said, we're going to legalize fourplexes. And so do one of these things just suddenly make it affordable for everybody? Like, no, like all these things take a little bit of time. Had we passed our new land development code in March of 2020, like there were so many thousands of housing units about to go because there were architects and builders and developers, and there were all these underutilized sites, and they were just like ready to go with plans in hand with tons of density bonus, income restricted, affordable housing units that weren't going to be subsidized by taxpayers. So we passed Prop A in 2018. We passed Prop A in 2022. Austin voted unanimously, overwhelmingly to pass those items. But we also heard from folks who are like, what are other mechanisms to help pay for these income restricted units? And the strategic housing blueprint is very clear. The subsidized units paid for by city bond dollars is a piece of the pie that make all these housing units possible. Density bonus units are a big part of that. And that's what we were going to do in a comprehensive land development code rewrite. They're going to legalize a ton of housing in exchange for all these other community benefits paid for by the developer. So, us just trying to say, well, developers are bad and we have to keep them out of Austin. They can't build here. We want them all in Kyle building forever far away. That's just so bad for us. We've got to get through that. But yeah, it's tough. Like other cities are facing this faster and faster and more.
Yeah.
It's really cool to see governors. Go look at Montana of all places. And there's just states that are looking at the housing crisis and they're like, wait a minute, at the state level, we're going to say this isn't cool. Like we have to pass better housing legislation. California is doing the same as well. Yeah. In Texas, SB 1412 had one of the 70 no votes voted yes. That was going to go 69-69. The speaker was in favor. The governor was in favor. And we were going to make accessory dwelling units, or those backyard granny flats, easy to build statewide. We were one vote away. Our local delegation was split 4-4.
I'm about to say, wasn't there some local Austin representatives that voted against it?
There were, yeah. So you had Sheryl Cole, Busey, Tallarico, and Troxclair voted yes. And then, unfortunately, Howard, Flores, Hinojosa, and Goodman voted no.
And what was the reasoning behind the no vote?
It was just the quick reactionary local control, period.
Yeah.
And, sure, local control is important in a lot of aspects, but if you're just making it easier for someone to build a home in their backyard, is that actually ever going to be a bad thing in a state that is more and more facing affordability issues across the spectrum, metro, rural, you name it. We don't do ribbon cuttings. We do board cuttings.
Okay.
And we were doing a board cutting in San Marcos, a while ago. And the mayor was just like, would you guys please fix your housing situation? I'm just like, excuse me, what's going on?
We're here fixing your housing situation.
Right. No, well, he was very clear about it. He's like, when Austin has displacement, you're pricing out folks. They come down here.
Yeah.
And a lot of them earn a lot more than our folks.
Right.
So they're displacing our folks. And so when we're downwind of Austin's bad housing policies, we are all feeling that. And so, yeah, we're growing like crazy as a metro. Second fastest growing now. We were the first. Before that, we were the second to Vegas back in the day. And so, when you're growing like that, like if you don't allow folks to live here, push them out there, we're making everybody face these issues, and it could be a lot better.
Yeah, snowball effect. Yeah. And you mentioned like state level too. And I think I've noticed more and more housing being mentioned at the federal level, right? So even from like presidential candidates and stuff like that, I think it's being brought into the conversation of some of like one of the biggest challenges that we face today as a country, honestly, like, and how it goes hand in hand with all the rest of it, with income inequality and just general poverty and things like that. So
there's something called the Obama White House Housing Toolkit. So President Obama, a few presidents ago, came up with a pretty impressive toolkit of just like, look, you guys have to figure this out at the local level, and you have to do these things. There were a lot of really strong suggestions on there. And it was interesting because his successor, President Trump, took over and cleared that website out, kind of top to bottom, changed a lot of things, left that toolkit on there for a long time.
Oh, interesting.
It just kept sitting on there for a little while. I was just like, whoo, we're all like, wow, okay. It eventually, I think, did go. But yeah, every presidential candidate in the 2022 cycle reached out to International Habitat. And that was, I think, our first time that we had ever seen that happen, where they were all like, let's talk housing.
Yeah.
So yeah, even at the federal level, it's happening. And it's just, and then, so we were already in this hole of 3 to 4 million units nationwide. Like since the great financial downturn of 07 to 10, we've just been in this real collective hole of housing units. And now you throw on to that this spike in interest rates, like things are just really getting bad. They were already bad. They're getting worse. They're getting faster. And so, yeah, the tailwinds on getting things done is only growing.
Right. Yeah. And I think too, when you're in this big of a hole, that it takes federal resources to a degree to help chip away at this, right? Like people like you and others here on the ground in Austin are obviously doing your fair share, but the federal resources just have such deeper pockets, and to be able to combat this. And so
they can do things through, carrots and sticks. So yeah, all municipalities and cities and states, we all want, counties, they're just trying to do certain things. And the monies that come from the federal government are used in a lot of different ways to help our cities function. And yeah, there might be something one day that just says, look, you have to have a modern land development code that allows for different types of housing, or you don't get access to these dollars.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cities are going to be like, oh, wait, but we need that. So we'll see what happens.
Well, you might have just answered it, but I was going to say, you're a dictator for a day. You're a benevolent dictator for one day in the United States. How do you address housing? And I know that's very simplistic, and we've just talked about how there is no wave your hand. And you mentioned that the director of housing in Dallas said, one thing that they could do to fight affordability would be to fight NIMBYism. But from a federal level, you're dictator for a day. What do you do with your power?
Ooh,
other than jail your enemies?
No, never. No, we have to have a big conversation. That's a big part of it. So I would appoint a Ves Azar to every mayor, governorship, and presidential role in the United States and let him fix it. He's a great housing whiz here in Austin. We're lucky to have him.
Oh, that's great. Well, we hope this day comes.
Yes. You should maybe invite him on one day.
Yeah. I'll see if I can get him. Yeah. All right. Well, last question. Anything exciting that you've got going on at Habitat? Any kind of things on the horizon, big projects coming up? Kind of what's on your plate? What are you working on?
There's a Rosewood Courts. So HACA, Housing Authority City of Austin, built some housing communities with the help of Lyndon B. Johnson many years ago. And they are redeveloping one that we are putting 12 townhomes on.
That's right. I've seen the demolition over there and the engineering going on. That's right.
We just wrapped up some townhomes in Miller. We just broke ground on 126 for-sale condominiums in Southeast Austin near Perez Elementary School.
I've seen that one too by Onion Creek Metropolitan Park.
Exactly, but completely out of the floodplain. A whole lot of topography, and we are far outside of the Onion Creek floodplain.
Right.
Yeah, there were a lot of buyouts in that area. And so the elementary school went from, don't quote me on the numbers, I want to say about 940 students to the high sevens. And so when we told them we're putting in some family-friendly multi-bedroom homes, they're just like, yes, please. Can you build it faster? And they're so great. They invite us out to every community event. They're just so much fun to work with. And then there's something absolutely revolutionary, so amazing we're working on right now. And I'm not allowed to say it yet because it's too exciting. And loose lips sink ships in real estate. So I don't want to jeopardize the potential of these homes getting built, but there's something really fun on the horizon.
Is this a false tease or is this real?
No, this is so real. It's so real. It's going to happen. Crossing fingers. I need some wood over here. Come here. Yeah, no, it's going to be a lot of fun. But just, breaking ground on multifamily, and we're finishing up our Scenic Point community out in District 1 near Johnny Morris, Loyola. An amazing community member just came in one day and said, hey, I have 14 acres of platted SF4A, so it's smaller lot, 3,600 square foot lot each, which are still huge lots. He's like, I've got this land if y'all want to just help build some homes for some great folks. And we're just like, yes. And it's been so amazing. And then we just did a great partnership with AISD where we built 30 homes, and we kind of advertised those first to AISD staff and teachers, and had over 1,000 folks share interest with us within a matter of hours. So a lot of school teachers definitely want to live in our community. So AISD is taking housing just super seriously. They're working with their board and board of trustees. And so everyone's talking about it more. We're all trying to do what we can. And And like I said, those tailwinds are growing. So the future has to be better than the recent past.
Absolutely. I appreciate the outlook. And I appreciate your time.
Anytime.
It's been a pleasure, and I hope those listening and watching got some nuggets to take away, and hope to have you back in the future.
Thanks. I'm easy to find. Walkable Austin. Greg Anderson. Reach out. Love to talk housing.
Awesome. Thank you, Greg.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.